members, the question is that Part 3 stand part. I call Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure to stand and take a call on Part 3 of the bill. I know that my counterpart, Mr. Mallard, will be very pleased to take a call on this part as well. To date, Mr. Chair, we have had a wide-ranging debate. The substantive parts of this bill were contained in Part 2. They did set out the way that the referendum would be conducted, and they also set out the provisions as to how this referendum would be slightly different than your average referendum. Coming to Part 3, obviously is a slightly less detailed part of the bill, including miscellaneous provisions. It includes amendments to the Flags, Emblems and Names Protection Act 1981, which sets out the various flags under which we already operate. This is a really interesting part of the discussion during our Select Committee. And although it was an interesting part of the discussion, it's one I'm likely to give a brief call on for the benefit of my colleagues. And basically what we learned is that there are a number of emblems under which New Zealand currently operates. There's of course the New Zealand flag, as we know it. On that side of the House, Jackie Dean seemed to be of the view that not everyone in New Zealand would be able to identify the New Zealand flag. Obviously, she holds slightly less hope for our both education system or the New Zealand public generally. But the New Zealand flag, as we know it, is one of the flags under which we operate. But also, there is some provision for the 1902 flag already within legislation. I want to make reference to that briefly because I found that fascinating. So Part 5A of Part 3 states that the 1902 flag is recognised as a flag of historical significance to the realm. Not often we have that terminology in a bill. Government and people of New Zealand. Any person or body other than a government department may use the 1902 flag except where required by law to use the New Zealand flag or another specified flag for a particular purpose. Now, what's interesting there is that there aren't actually many areas in which you're specified that you must use the New Zealand flag. Now, the reason this is interesting is because what the Select Committee found was actually there won't be necessarily, if we change the flag, a requirement in many areas for the new flag to be used. In fact, we could arrive at a scenario where we end up with both the 1902 flag, which still you're able to use as set out under the Flags and Emblems and Names and Protection Acts 1981. You could feasibly still use the old New Zealand flag because under this bill we still would recognise it as a past flag of New Zealand, and you could then have a third flag, which is obviously the new flag if it were to be voted upon. Of course, we would also have the Tino Rangitingatanga flag flown during Waitangi Day as well. And of course, if you're in the military, often you'll see our soldiers wearing a kiwi on their arm. So technically, that's what, 5 different emblems. 5 different emblems that we could feasibly have and be able to use by law. Now, that seemed like a quite ridiculous situation, but one of the government's arguments over why the RSA shouldn't be upset by this flag referendum was that they could feasibly still fly the old New Zealand flag anyway. New Zealand First could still have their flags on their boxes. Great news, I know that you've invested a lot in buying some of those really great house boxes with the flag on it. You wouldn't have to get rid of them, I've noticed. You wouldn't have to get rid of them. They would still technically be able to be used. Now, on that side of the House, they thought that that was a lovely, elegant solution. On this side of the House, we thought that just seemed a bit bizarre. So under that Act, we would have, as I described, the 1902 flag, the New Zealand flag, and any other flag that you may choose to have. And it was really noted that in particular, those in the armed forces may choose to use whatever emblem they choose, and it might be the old flag. Mr. Chair, I think it's a confused situation, and I think this referendum only adds to it. Another reason for there to be no change at all because of the cost that we're incurring to have this debacle anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I see them?